something right, or misrecognition leading to another a break of habit, or so my words for this one is misrecognition, rupture, loss, non-knowledge, errancy, fault, the aporia. Aporias were not porous, not passing through. Exaggeration, lack, distortion, mistake, slippage, madness, impossibility, unnameability, blindness, double. So all words that I will in some way touch upon, but the idea that perhaps art is not something that can be subject to usual measure or method. Method is really used in a scientific sense to regulate an experiment, to produce the same result again and again and again. So Descartes said that method is truth, whereas, and it produces the self-same. So the repetition of the experiment is that it gives a constancy and an accuracy. In fine art, we don't want to repeat the experiment again and again. We want the production of difference, or the production of the new, in which case we're breaking with habit. We're looking at something which doesn't necessarily repeat in the same way. This is a quote from Lyotard. We thought we knew how to see. Works of art teach us that we were blind. So this sense of perhaps running through this presentation is the idea of double vision, seeing with one eye and feeling in another eye, a sort of a contradictory way of seeing, a doubled over vision, a fold of contrary states of being. I was watching, I've got one or two YouTube extracts, and this is from Werkmaster Harmonies by Béla Tarr, a Hungarian filmmaker from 2000. And it's full of kind of sayings like this. So I don't think about anything, I just watch the rain. Kind of a sort of disavowal of not just thinking, but a disavowal of representation, a way of just being with something. So the sort of predication of things which in other spheres might be considered errant, if representation is based upon a stable identity, the representation of art often shatters this ground in order to destroy predictability. In doing so, it touches a sense residing before or after signification in order to generate surprise. So part of the task of art is to generate not stable identities and representations and of the self-same, but rather produce a surprise, or not present necessarily the truth as proof, but a surprise or a freedom. Freedom is a kind of rupture, a kind of negation of rule. So I was thinking about the sense of getting things right to getting things wrong to get them right. This is the Bump collection of Comme des Garçons from 1997, where she was experimenting with almost errant body shapes which would be deemed to be ugly or distorted or exaggerated or the sort of almost the idea of something which wasn't beautiful, but a kind of, on the other side, a different sense of the body, a different sense of how fashion can be with the body. So kind of taking when it was shown as a collection, it took people by surprise. They didn't quite know how to handle it. So a new syntax in the relationship of body and costume. This introduces a surprise based on striation of bodily sense that introduces the unknown into the fashion world. And it made me think of Titian's painting Diana and Acton, which is in the National Gallery. And if you look at, for instance, the heads, the head of Diana. So this figure here, look at the head here. It's far too small for the body. It looks like it's painted almost separately. It's the distortion. So bodily shape, and the painting looks like it's on a kind of sliding down. So this shape here of the water vessel is kind of distorted. It's not in perspective. It's not in good order. But if you look at the relation of the faces to the head, they're all wrong. But it gives you the feeling of surprise and arrest. And Titian, in his late work, was completely errant in terms of perspectival space and drawing. When Vasari visited his studio with Michelangelo in Venice, Michelangelo said he's a good painter, but he just can't draw. But Titian was one of the first artists to really use a kind of exaggeration or errancy to produce the effect of something, a kind of, in this case, a shock, a surprise. Acton becomes turned into a stag and is hunted down by his own dogs, and for daring to catch sight of the bathing spectacle. So, although it's not formally correct, it works. You kind of see this as being in advance of the time it was in, but breaking the rule to produce a new rule. That was one of Kant's definitions of genius, is that which makes up its own rule rather than follows a rule. This is a painting by Jenny Saville, propped, from 1992. Again, we find this complete exaggeration of the body, a kind of a sense of flesh which is not anatomically credible, but nevertheless conveys a sort of feeling of the fleshness of flesh, if you like, what it is to have a body, not just what it is to be seen having a body, a reversal of sense, as it were, a painting from both within and from without at the same time. So something which isn't necessarily, you're able to predict the outcome of that. It's just you, as a painter, you explore through exaggeration what sort of coheres. So it's breaking the rules of mimetic. Mimetic is copying of things as they are, or the truth of appearance. But it comes the sum total of the forces released in the process of depiction. So this idea of conveying forces rather than conveying appearances. This is timely in that this Bacon show is on at the moment. Bacon distorts appearance in order to introduce, discontinuity into identity to the self-portrait. So a kind of feeling of, again, moving paint around until you get something like a feeling of forces rather than a feeling of appearances, and can capture a kind of flash of the appearance, a kind of a rapid glance, which works on a deeper level than mere appearance. This show is strange in that the Academy, in that it's could be deemed to be very beautiful. It's got this low light and these Georgian-coloured walls. Feels very soft and almost decorative, yet the subject matter is abject. So this feeling of the sort of beauty of appearance, of just superficial harmony with striation of the subject matter. When he's finds the image through painting, where he doesn't know where he's going. Often in the earlier paintings, it's a lot more successful than later paintings, where you feel that somehow his painting of Francis Bacon is a mannerist. He knows his own habits. So there's less struggle to find out a new image. This is painting Francis Bacon, so that they lose that sense of risk or throwing the dice into a sea of nihility or loss or rupture. Encounter with the new is invariably accompanied by a feeling of shock because it's an event of a minor mode of violence. Violence in context is a form of discontinuity. So in Bacon, you get this feeling of rupture, of breaking the rule, of discontinuity and misrecognition, or the risk of misrecognition. So sometimes in the early painters, you don't quite know where you are, what you're looking at. This is a painting by Philip Guston. As you know, he started off life as an abstract expressionist and one of the most tasteful abstract expressionists. And suddenly he because of events in America, the combination of civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, he wanted to have a relationship to this rupture of civil society. He kind of started to moving against Greenbergian notions of taste and high art and fine art, low art. He started to look at underground comics and find a new visual language. This head in a bottle, head disc kind of is like just an eye popping out of a face without a mouth or without a neck or without a body. And it's a kind of erasure of distance. You could say that modernity is built upon the idea of mimetic distance, if you like, between subject and object. Here the face, the perceiving subject, is in impossible relationship to the perceived object, which is the bottle. It's a claustrophobic, impossible image. So head in a bottle from 1709 we could understand as a collapse of Cartesian difference. Subject and object are ossified in separation, but the possibility of judgment and clarity imploded into a nightmare of enframing of the real. Enframing is the presence of things. Technology is a structure of re-presencing the world in a way that governs the world. Object that stands opposed to us as a source to be manipulated. The world might be seen as a gasoline tank, a mere resource at our disposal. That was Heidegger's sense of technology. So the world is a standing resource, an object of calculation. If the object reflects back in the face of others' visions, then the very possibility of mutability appears to be eroded and lost. So it's an impossible image, but one which reveals the new principle of reality. This is a work by Enrico David, a drawing from 2020. So there's a kind of a fascination with excess and intersection of appearance and essence. So many elements in circulation. What passes through, what refracts from, what penetrates are all features of the invisible vitality or the virtual reserve. Such questions do not find an answer because the paradox is reigning at its center. and this relationship to a subject that finds itself only through perpetual movement of all of its elements and desire that attempts to fix these within an image. Cognition alone is incapable of giving form to this, whereas art approaches this dimension. This dimension might enter into a process of residing within a chaotic fragmentation through which outlines or vectors might be hinted at. Art, in order to be art, must hint at the existence of perpetual elsewhere. So this idea of always being elsewhere to the image, of always being on the exterior, extreme outside. The elsewhere opens out as a future yet to come, and yet as such it signifies the capacity of the imagination to switch vectors of time that is marked by the arrival of something that is incapable of moving outside of itself. I'll read that again. Art, in order to be art, must hint at an existence of a perpetual elsewhere. This elsewhere opens out the future yet to come, and as such signifies the capacity of the imagination to switch vectors of time. So a kind of mutability between past, present, and future that is marked by the arrival of something that is capable of moving outside of itself. So not just being lodged in time, not being fixed by time, but discovering the mutability of time. So cognition alone is incapable of giving form to this. This is a Chinese Ming artist called Bada Shiran, Three Fish Ming Dynasty. And 17th century. So the fish assumes eyes that are human-like. Is this a sign of Bada's assumption of madness, or is it a sign of almost seeing beyond seeing? Instead of giving a depiction of fish, there are instead portraits of fish that is caught in the nether region between the human and non-human. So I kind of sense we don't know quite what we're looking at. Something, is it merely fish, or is it fish becoming human? Or is it humans becoming fish? We're not never sure, and this kind of is mad in a way. Kind of Bada, as an artist, assumed they thought he was mad, or did he act mad, or it's unsure. But in kind of mixing up signs and categories, produced an image of reality that moves you outside of tradition, arrests you, it takes you somewhere else. This is a photograph by Daido Maruyama, the Japanese photographer who's still alive. So he writes the photograph. He says that a photograph, on the other hand, is subject to the viewer's memory, aesthetics, and feelings, all of which affect how the photograph is seen. It isn't conclusive in the way that language is. That's what makes photography interesting. There's no point in taking photographs that use language in an expository way. Taking photographs for the purpose of language is for the most part meaningless for me. Rather, photography provokes language. It recasts language. Within it, various gradations outline a new language. It provokes the world of language. Looking at images leads to the discovery of a new image. So again, we get this in a different way. This art is the presentation of new, of a disruption of habit, kind of creation of a new rule or a new language. So if language is dictated by the relationship to cognition, the photograph as an image is part of the imaginary. It's part of feeling, it's part of effective encounter. And that is a realm which is ambiguous and disinclined to be reduced. It's one of the most famous scenes in the whole of history of cinema. This is an interesting image, or interesting. One of the questions Hitchcock would face, he said, "You've got a star who's killed off very early in your film. Why is that?" And he said that it was to throw the expectancy of the audience, but he created it in 1960 when censorship was still incredibly strict. So I had to use all the devices to simply evade these powers. These invasions in turn meant that the viewer imagined more than what was actually could be seen. This sequence signified the failure of censorship, but it was a triumph of invention. In other words, he did everything to get round the censorship. And so very little was actually, you think you're seeing a lot more than you see. And he used, the soundtrack was really interesting. He got his sound man to experiment with pushing knives into carcasses, and he got the right carcass to the right sound of what sounds like a knife going into a body. So a lot of it was a movement away from the visual into the soundscape. So it wasn't seen, but could be heard. It evaded censorship. So by shifting registers away from the visual into the soundscape or sound effects, special effects, he evaded censorship. And the censors didn't know how he did it quite. He got away with by following rules. He got around the rules, but the effect was really incredibly disturbing and arousing of its disturbance. This is a still image of from a film by Tarkovsky, Mirror. It's where a sort of woman looks into the mirror and sees herself in as old age, so it sees her future. So it presents the interweaving of memory and the temporal flux throughout the border between dream and reality is rendered uncertain. Nothing as it might be expected. A woman looks in a mirror and sees her face as if become very old. Such things might occur in a dream, but what is it that divides dream from reality? So this film played with temporal registers, played with past, present, and future in ways which made them move in together and interweave and create a complex web of uncertainty of temporal register. We see a hut burning and it's pouring with rain. We can't quite work out why things are happening the way they're happening, whether they are in the viewer's mind or whether they are real. The image of the philosopher Walter Benjamin is a sort of one of the great paradoxical figures of the 20th century, because in his lifetime he barely published anything. He failed his exams to become a teacher, or they declined to be too obscure. So at his death in 1939, 1940, he died he committed suicide on the border between France and Spain. He thought the Gestapo would catch up to him, and the Spanish authorities had closed the border for a day, and the day later they opened the border again. So it was a day too early or a day too late. So he didn't arrive on time and took his life. And his main project was Arcades Project, which was left in the library in Paris with Georges Bataille. And Georges Bataille hid it away from any intrusions of the Nazis who occupied France at that time. So it was published a long time after his death. It wasn't published in England until I think the 1980s. But from the 60s onwards, he became one of the most published and written about intellectuals of the 20th century. His writing, which was untimely in his lifetime, had become timely outside of it. So his death kind of was marked by a kind of paradox of marked the difference between being untimely and timely. He found his time outside of his time. So it's not just the work of art that finds its relationship outside of time, it's also philosophy. This is a poet, Paul Celan. I just extracted a fragment from a poem. Spring, trees flying up to their birds. A kind of complete dislocation of sense or common sense. An impossible image, but an image which opens out the imagination, as if for the first time. Paul Celan, his parents died in a concentration camp, but he continued to write. He was a Romanian. He continued to write in Germany. He lived in Paris. And when he was 50, he committed suicide in the. So, like Benjamin, he was a wartime victim, but under circumstances which, in the case of Benjamin, divided untimely with time, and with Celan, it's like he died when he was in his age. He was age 50. I think he jumped into the Seine, River Seine. But it produced these very sparse and terse poems, which are almost untranslatable. So poetry is that condition of excess that opens the door of impossible perception. Doesn't quite make sense, but it produces an excess which is its own relationship to language. It's another language outside of language. Another impossible image is Joseph Beuys' Capri Battery, which just works by relationships of color, but suggests a different relationship of energy between the organic and inorganic. This is once strange, but also poetically made alive by the sense of what if. It makes the impossible thinkable by virtue of closing the gap between reality and fiction. So a lot of you might know that you can play with registers between the real and the fiction, and fantasy and reality, and produce through closing the gap between these different vectors or different registers, produce a new rule for depiction. So again, this idea of something which is strange, but also poetically made alive. You entertain what if. So part of art is this sense of it might be errant, but it sort of somehow works. Scientist Daniel Dennett once said that often errant thinking is a greater stimulus of further thinking than neat, correct statements. That often we proceed through mistakes, even in experimentation. An experiment which would get something wrong can lead to an insight of how to get it right, rather than if it's just takes two reductive paths, takes the two correct paths. So you've often got to have a leap of intuition. And some of the great scientific insights have come through intuition, not through sober experimentation. It's a writer, Helen Sassoon. She says thinking is trying to think the unthinkable. Thinking the thinkable is not worth the effort. We're certainly not taught that at school, are we? We are dissuaded from thinking outside of the box. Certainly this idea of thinking is trying to think the unthinkable is not something that is readily entertained. This is why a lot of people finish up in art schools, is that they dare to think the unthinkable, or do the impossible, or play around with errancy, against the grain, throwing the dice, taking a chance. Risking. There's the writer Maurice Blanchot. Every artist is linked to a mistake with which he has a particular intimate relation. The mistake of Homer, of Shakespeare, which is perhaps for both the fact of not existing. Every art draws its origin from an emotional fault. Every work of art is the implementation of this original fault, from which comes to us in a new light and a risky conception of plenitude. This is Hakuin, the 18th century Zen monk and artist. He came up with the question, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Which, of course, it's impossible. If you try and answer it logically, you just go a little bit crazy. You can't answer it. So it relies upon a kind of flash, a rupture with logical reality principle. This is just simply called death. It's like a kind of simple, factual statement of a state of being, but though death belongs to no one, the relationship to it undoes identity and thus asserts itself as an impossibility of relation. Death becomes an entity signifier, and as such it haunts the social field with a mood of anxiety because it's unknowable. Death occurs when we simply become exhausted, or when we make a mistake, we have an accident, or we're caught by something like a disease, or caught in the middle of a war. There's an image from Pierre Le Fou by Jean-Luc Godard from the mid-60s. There's a moment where he says real life is elsewhere, and he puts this dynamite around his body and looks at the sky and blows himself up. It's a perplexing image. It's a kind of crazy image. But it's a film about craziness. So a couple escape from Paris to the south of France. The narrative proceeds. They realize the relationship exists in a state of misrecognition. They say, why do you look so sad? Because you talk to me with words and I look at you with feelings. So they know that they, in Lacan's statement, you never look at me from the place in which I see you. So all relations are in a way posited as relations of misrecognition, particularly relationships between male and female. And Godard, in a lot of these films of this period of the 60s, deals with circularities of misrecognition, of not being able to match up what the gesture is with what the language states, or what a structured reality is. This is a still from Alphaville, which is like a science fiction. So it's from 1966, I think it is. Science fiction film of the Outer Lands. Alphaville depicts a society without memory, and such life is lived in the eternal present. The use of language is in turn controlled, and the word love, for instance, is deemed to portray a subversive relationship to the social order, and those that utter it are condemned to death. So it's run by a computer, Alpha 60. I've got a fragment of that, which I'll play you later. And again from Alphaville, no one has lived in the past and no one will live in the future. So it's the idea of a society in which the past is erased and there's no future. So the time is circular and is regulated by the computer, Alpha 60, that generates a rule. So it's a society without spontaneity, without affection, and without love, and without human emotion. Again, another Godardian statement: the more we talk, the less words mean. So it's the paradox of language alongside the black holes or misrecognition within states of becoming is what Godard is in his film essays, trying to find these paradoxes of reality, this relationship between appearance and language. He often quotes indirectly from the philosopher Wittgenstein. And it's part of this idea that grew up in Paris of the spectacle and the situation. The great film Two Lives of Veronique. All my life I felt I was in two places at the same time, here and somewhere else. It's about a Polish woman who feels that she lives somewhere else as well. She can't work out this feeling of being haunted. And she dies as one Veronique and is born elsewhere as another Veronique. The double life of Veronique, a woman born at the same time, seemingly identical, both live with the sensation of missing someone. Freud thought that these instances in which the double are encountered indicate the phenomena of the uncanny. Following this, from this, Deleuze developed his discussion of the double in terms of virtual and actual image within the structure of mirroring, which leads to a coalescing between the two. Not only is the image constructed out of two sides, actual and virtual, but also on the eternal level, the self is thrown into division. The double is in alliance with the spirits and phantoms, causing differentiation between the animate and inanimate. Freud describes the double as how it's related to mirrors, spirits, and shadows. I'll show a small section of the double life afterwards. This is an image by Man Ray. I found this quote by Jacques Lacan: desire, function central to all human experiences, is desire for nothing nameable. And at the same time, this desire lies at the origin of every variety of animation. If being only were what it is, there wouldn't be even room to talk about it. Being comes into existence, the exact function of this lack. So for him, desire was based upon lack and negation. So desire is a desire for desire. It's endlessly impossible. It never resolves itself. It's the movement of negation itself. This is, of course, the difference. This is the difference that Deleuze and Guattari had with Lacan, is that they built their theory of desire and the idea of desire machines on affirmation. This is from Pasolini's film Oedipus, who, as you know, blinded himself on the discovery of him sleeping with his mother and killing his father and creating famine within the city of Thebes. That he in a way, it's the birth of the modern subject. He defies the Sphinx, he defies the gods, is a rational being who is blinded by rationality. He can't see, so he, in despair, in finding out what he's done, he blinds himself to align himself with his own condition. So this is a quote by Lankid Zupanexit. So it's this idea that he was blind in the Nietzschean sense. His life was blind eyes because he was thrown away as a child. He was cast away. He was when his mother and father learned that he was going to bring great ruin to the city. The gods requested that he would be killed, but they couldn't do it. So they put him in a blanket and left him to die on the side of a road. And he was found by a shepherd and brought up. So he didn't know he was the son of a king and a queen. So Zupanexit, in a way, is contesting the Freudian idea of the Oedipus complex. She said the thing is not what is that he slept with his mother and killed his father, but it was him as an object that was, from the very outset, eliminated from the picture, thrown out in the form of a bundle and package that his parents entrusted to a shepherd with instructions that he must disappear. It was this elimination that, at the very outset, determines Oedipus' perspective, as well as a picture image of the world in which he then blindly finds himself. This is a Congolese mask, and believed to be clairvoyant masks. Of being able to see, well, certainly the one on my left-hand side. There's double eyes, to see things twice over, to see things straight, and to see things within the spirit realm, to see the present and see the future. Divining eyes. One of the great depictions of not just clairvoyance, but the ability to see double, to see twice over. So the mask is the intersection of worlds, the spirit world, the world of the yet to come, a world that can be divined and be seen and can be respected as being regulated by the spirit realm. So those who wear such a mask are diviners of the future, as well as acting as a warning to not overemphasize the relationship to everyday vision of common sense, of factuality. With this mask, one set of eyes indicates everyday vision, the eyes below, a form of astral vision that goes beyond temporal and spatial dimensions of the here and now, of empirical vision. Masks in general not only indicate the impossibility of transposing identity, but also movement across planes of reality, particularly the planes involving the apprehension of the realm of the spirits. This doubling of vision encoded into the mask indicates the ability to pass through another dimension of seeing. This, of course, is what Picasso, why he was so drawn to African masks, was this kind of not only a disavowal of empirical reality, of mimesis, of things as they are, but this being able to pass through realms of intersecting spirits and intersecting the realm of the dead, as much as being with the living. This is a Central Asian figure, and it comes out of an interesting story. The story was told out to a Chinese pilgrim during one of his long wanderings in the north. Once upon a time, there were two men, both devoted to the teachings of the Buddha. Each of them dreamed of an image of the Buddha, but they were too poor to pay for two sculptures, so they asked the artist to make them only one. Buddha himself, in an act of kindness, divided the image into two. Kindness and compassion is an important teaching in Buddhism. So the intersection of the Buddha into a simple act of devotion solved the problem of the lack of being able to afford an image of the Buddha. So he split himself into two as an acknowledgement of the desire. The desire was pure. This is a sculpture from the Heian or Kamakura period in Japan. Again, this face beneath a face. So it represents a famous figure from early Chinese Buddhism, Pao Chi, who was a renowned holy man and magician. After his death in 1514, legends developed crediting him with supernatural powers. The belief was developed that he was able to transform himself into the likeness of a bodhisattva. In this sculpture, the monk's head is split open to reveal the bodhisattva Avalokitesvara. So again, this double vision, this double face, this intersection of realms, this opening out of different planes of reality. And it goes with this sense of a double negation. Things are not as they appear, nor are they otherwise. The Chinese Buddhist Sutra. So this kind of impossible statement, this double negation, this riddle of not seeing things in plain ways, of a very complex way of seeing that reality is made up of illusion, and that you have to crack the perception of that thrown up by this illusion. Notably, the split between object and subject, between the subject of perception and the object of appearance. Again, a great modernist depiction of being doubled over. So Claude Cahun's What Do You Want of Me? So two contraposed portraits construct a non-symmetrical hybrid image. The image suggests a form of impossible dialogue in which eyes never meet. The montage denaturalizes vision in order to open the unconscious to the play of otherness. In this image, the suggestion of spectrality looms beyond the splitting of a realist identification. The question the question of original on the level of identity is probed in her work to the point that the very question becomes disassembled. For Cahun, identity was a series of masks behind masks in an unending recessional space that can never be measured. So again, this undoing of representational space, of stable identity, of fixed manner of thinking as sort of instead of recessional, non-mimetic space in which the image never resolves itself. So this kind of black hole of identification and recognition is centered to the art. which is both, in a way, it's surrealist, but it's also incredibly late modern. That's why she, hardly in her lifetime, was known and was discovered in a later period. She came to the fore in the 80s when artists like Cindy Sherman were experimenting with identity. Small black and white images were seen as containing a syntax for this experiment in identity. This Frida Kahlo, again, this idea of a split identity. So again, this idea of not just splitting, but of kind of destabilizing, not just inside and outside, not just doubles, but also a relationship between the self and other is demolished, become doubled over, a kind of mirror image. So at the limit of identity, everything begins to fracture, and the madness of vision assumes the force within presentation. This is Theodore Géricault, his paintings of did these whole series of portraits of the mad in Salem asylums. Géricault's portraits of the insane were painted without having the world to see, in effect, painted for no one. The image not cast as a look, but rather indicates the nature of the encounter with the self that is no longer joined to the world through its act of projection. Madness for Foucault is a form of déjà of death, because the head that will become a skull is already empty. This kind of emptiness of vision, looking, has not been able to project what's inside the head with what's outside and find a mirror image. An absence of sense. The questions. Anyone want to make a contribution or ask a question or explore an issue?
It's just a lot to take in a short time.
So it's very much a sort of collage of different. It's not a single narrative.
I mean, you talk about montage, and I know that Godard, that's a very big device of his. I mean, maybe just talk around that just for a second, and Godard's theory of montage and how it applies to some of the things tonight.
Well, it's a sort of collage of different, sort of takes a signifying chain of misrecognition, errancy, beyond representation, presentation, rupture. So it's sort of it's a disavowal of method as well in representation. So it's not a stable image of something. So it proceeds through sort of series of ruptures and gets you to think outside of continuities, and so discontinuity is a kind of principle of montage, and it's also a way of introducing different temporalities. So the film Double Life of Ronique is not just a double life, but it's a kind of way of, I mean, that's sort of representation of a kind of an ecstatic singing going into a death, and the death is represented as the spirit flying out of the body, and so it takes you to the other side of death, and kind of it's almost as if you're looking at as she's buried. It's her view of the proceeding as the soul comes in on her, and then she finds herself in Paris, in bed with a man. So it goes from Thanatos, death, to Eros, sort of ecstatic time, if you like. So double ecstatic time, death and sexual excess or sexual absorption. I played the last music because it's post-apocalyptic song, so it sounds like a love song, perhaps, meeting between two souls, but it's post-apocalypse, post-World War III, the nuclear fallout. We've been eating berries for 6-7 weeks now, probably keep us both alive. And it's kind of reversion to wooden ships, a kind of an image of freedom, a kind of sailing the waves away from the devastation. So it's I added the Werkmast this morning. I found it's a curious image of this Hungarian village in which a whale is shown as a visiting circus, and it brings a kind of foreboding, a sort of sense of something's going to happen. But it starts off with this sort of cosmic image, but it's like so errant. It's like the drunken peasantry kind of enacting a kind of sublime vision of the universe, inebriated, insensible, sort of impossible image, as it were. But the language is very refined, and the movement is completely chaotic and inept and sort of impossible to read. So this relationship between the image and the poetic word is dislocated. I mean, there's other things as well. The Alphaville section is interesting, where you get the interrogation of the non-human, the machine, the machinic, unconscious, the computer, who does everything by calculation, and the way that Lemmy Caution answers is he tries to throw the machine out of its habitual way of calculating. So he says he evades the machine. He says you're free to be here at the moment. We're not going to arrest you or put you into confinement, or you're not the enemy yet, but you're strange. You're strange. Your answers are strange. They defy the machine.
Thank you.
Long time no see, David.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, yeah. I've been unable to attend until now. Hang on. That's really interesting. I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit more about the mirror. You were talking about mirrors, about a doubling and yet not a double earlier on.
There's a lot of images of mirrors. There's the doubling over, double vision as a kind of mirroring, but also the film Mirror by Tarkovsky.
Oh, yeah.
Where
Tchaikovsky.
Tchaikovsky,
Right.
Russian filmmaker.
Okay.
A great montageist. But Mirror is really interesting in that he completely moves around in time, so you get different. You don't know which time you're in. You don't know whether you're in the time of childhood or middle age or old age or everyday life or dream life. Or he moves seamlessly through registers and moves seamlessly through black and white and color. He mixes color and black and white.
Wow.
But the main image I showed was of the woman looking into a mirror and seeing herself as old age.
Oh, yeah.
So you don't. I mean, you don't learn to make films like that. You have to find a space. You have to invent a space where that's possible. Especially within that time Soviet censorship. he managed to get his films accepted, but it was against the reality principle. I mean, it was he went against the great montages of early Russian cinema and developed his own relationship between image and time.
Okay. When was that made?
It's in the 70s. I forget the exact date. His other films are Stalker and Solaris, and Ivan, the child of Ivan. Solaris is strange because it's about this thinking ocean, this ocean that penetrates human memories and reproduces memories for those who observe are close to the planet. So this scientist, his dead wife comes alive again in a different chemical form. And he knows she's a simulation. She knows she's a figment of his imagination. But she's nonetheless real enough for him to not want to depart from her. So she has to learn how to be his wife again, learn the memories. It's a really fascinating film. Not much happens, but does it all through filmic effects.
Is that by Tchaikovsky as well?
Solaris by Tarkovsky.
Tchaikovsky.
No, Tarkovsky.
Sorry. Because Freud talks about oceanic thinking, doesn't he? And
slightly different thing. It's from a short story by Stanislav Lem called Solaris.
okay.
It's about an ocean that actually is made up of a matter which is a thinking ocean. The cosmic, he calls it in this book the cosmic yogi. But it reverses the relationship of matter and mind. So it's a kind of philosophical science fiction film. Any other questions? Any other thoughts?
Thank you.
Good you're here.
Hi. I don't know if it's a stupid question, but I'm really curious about it. I think the Daido Moriyama's view on the relationship between the photography and language is thoughtful. Sometimes I just think that writing an essay or have a conversation maybe can give more information and more accurate information to the audience. So why do we still need different art forms and medias like photography, painting, or any other forms? It is simply because they can stimulate different sense of the viewers, or does it create more ambiguous misunderstanding? Could you talk more about this?
Well, if art is the production of the new, or the reproduction of, or the presentation of difference, or the presentation of freedom, or the disruption of habitual ways of seeing, it's different from what we can say in terms of straightforward interpretation. Interpretation is based on what is. Art is still based on what is to become, or the becoming of something new, or the disruption of habit. It's not subject to a methodological reduction. To experiment with art is to open out the possibility that there is a different register, a different way of combining materiality, subjectivity, and temporality. It's not always successful. You have to have a lot of experiments to make something which is which makes that sort of rupture with reality. That's why art is connected very often with something which is violent, not violent in the big sense, but in a small sense of a scission, a rupture, an elsewhere, a kind of change of sense, breakage. I mean, even the principle of montage is putting two images together to create a third force, or create something outside of the conjunction between the two, to create a third. So it's to create a new reality out of the possibilities that is not necessarily logical. And it's in the realm of, often in the realm of the imaginary, which itself is the organ of the imagination and ambiguity in the image. The image is evasive. It's not that you see, with the poetic word, the poetry is an excess that's beyond signification. It's not reducible to meaning. It ruptures meaning, and that's what gives it its power. We have to accommodate something which we can't quite fit into our, over-rationalized common sense way of. It's like what Helen Sue said. It's thinking the unthinkable, and then she says it's the only worthwhile thing to do. We're not taught how to do that. We have to fall upon it. We have to kind of have to change behavior in such a way whereby we can accommodate errancy, be comfortable with it. So it's not just imagination, it's a change of behavioral pattern.
I think maybe it expand the range of the human consciousness, or
ultimately it's the conjunction between the human and the non-human forces. This is what is so important about the present, the Anthropocene, and is to try and occasion this relationship between. We've got a lecture coming of Catherine Malibu, and she talks about this relationship between historical and non-historical time. Sort of, we need to grasp hold of the human time. We're just a blink in the cosmic time. We're a very small footnote, as I said last week, I think, or the week before.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you. It's just a series of probes. It's sort of these micro moments where we can think about something in a way which opens out the difference which we try and make as artists, or even as thinkers, or experimenters, or it's not a manifesto, it's not a program, doesn't show you how to do anything. I said I'd do a meditation this week. I'm not going to do it this week. I'm doing it next week. I'm doing it next week. It's on eroticism. I'll teach a meditation, which is appropriate for this subject. And then the week after that is entanglement. So I've got the 3 E's. I don't know why. Errancy, eroticism, and there's no rhythm. There's no connection. But we'll see how we go with it. Any other thoughts? Natasha.
Hi.
Hi.
I just really connected to that quote that you put up, that all my life I felt like I was in 2 places at the same time, here and somewhere else.
Mm.
And I was thinking of the fact of feeling sometimes like English is my second language when it's not.
Mm.
And how you feel about, if you feel like you're in 2 places at the same time, how that must influence how I behave here, if it's not so permanent. Just wanted to, just wanted to hear you talk a little bit more on those thoughts.
we assume a stable identity, but on the level of anything, gender, we're partly with two genders at the same time, which we can perform to, and that things like gender are largely reiterative. We're fixed by the fact that we keep repeating. Languages flow through us in different ways. You can have the feeling that you speak a language which you don't understand, and it's in your own language, or you are in the world and you don't think you're understood by the world, or you're born into a family that you don't feel you fit. When I was growing up, this was in the 1950s in Derbyshire, there wasn't really a welfare state in the way that there is now, even in a draconian sense. So people lived on a street where if you found it difficult to be with your parents, you'd go to another house and live with that parent. You'd find some other parents and stay there. This was common. That children would migrate. If they were not fed very well, they'd go to a family where they got fed. Or if they didn't get affection, they'd go to a family where they got affection. This was very common in the 50s. So this feeling of not fitting in, there was accommodation for that, an organic accommodation. So now we are given, I don't know, therapy or drugs, but there's a sort of a non-technological way of dealing with psychological problems. I'm not idealizing it. I'm just saying it was different. I watched a program last night on life of Jane Fonda, which was interesting. But she has a period of her life when she took in children from other dysfunctional families and had a kind of commune. So we lose ourselves and find ourselves in another context very often. We find a way to get our identities to work or not work. We kind of we're caught by. I mean, something like schizophrenia is like it's a product of double bind, where we're told that we're safe when we're in harm's way, or we're told someone loves us and they slap us at the same time, or sort of put us in a situation of double bind. We're at school and we don't feel we're understood, and yet we're told that everything is being done to look after us. And so we're born into a social matrix in which everything's got rules of division. And sometimes we're in border regions where we don't know what we are and who we are, and we've got to find out. And that was the thing about art schools. When I was growing up, I went to Slade in 69 to 73. I went from school, but they used to line us all up with careers advice. The clever ones, they say you become a lawyer or go to university, become a lawyer or an accountant or something. You're good at maths, so you become an accountant. And they finished up with all the end ones, which were miscreants. And someone like fashion, you go to art school. Someone like jazz, go to art school. So all the miscreants would finish up at, in this case, Derby College of Art. And everyone was jealous of Derby College of Art because they had the best music and the best dance and the best social life, as it were. And they finished up in London, if they were lucky, and had a great time in London and found a way of becoming a photographer, fashion designer, or they had mobility. So it's a paradox that all the miscreants finished up with the best jobs and the best lifestyle, very often. It's not like that now. I don't think they line you up in the same way, but that was in the 1960s.
Thank you.
We've been doing it for 2 hours. 2 more questions. Can be any, you can make a contribution. You can, I mean, one of the things about this, it's outside of school hours. It's not part of the official program. It's just something that happens. It's not designed to continue next year. It's a one-off. So it's a chance to, it's non-credited. It's not part of your course.
Well, thank you for doing it, Jonathan.
It's a pleasure to do it. I do it because I enjoy doing it. I don't have to do it. But it's a sense of what I call an aesthetic community, developing an aesthetic community with inside institutions. So based on mutual respect and anyway, I'll see you next week, and I'll stay behind if you want.